And sugar is tricky because it is so appealing, and we are wired as a human species to go toward things that are sweet. It's a survival mechanism. Our brain wants the sweet stuff because we know that it's associated with calories. And when you're out there trying to survive in this world, you need calories to help you do that. We get addicted to sugar, and it's really tough to overcome.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show. I'm Dr. Ashley, and today we are going to dive into the controversial topic of sugar alcohols. You know, the zero-calorie, low-calorie sugar substitutes. There's been so much hype in the media about these recently. I want to help you just go through all of the information so that you don't get locked into the hype and the sensationalism that the media has given us around these topics. And I want you to understand the pros and the cons, if they're right for you, so that you can be an advocate for yourself and make the right decision for your health. Now, you know, many of you probably know my story and where I came from and how I got into the field of nutrition. But for those of you who don't, a little bit about my backstory is that I was a professional ballet dancer growing up, and I danced professionally in many countries across the nation. I had a pretty darn successful career. I was probably in the top 1% for all ballet dancers in the world, kind of like the Michael Phelps level for swimming, for ballet, but I constantly struggled with my health and my weight. I counted calories like crazy. I did everything I could to try to get my weight down for that specific sport, but no matter what I did, I was always told that I was fat. I was injured all the time because I did restrict myself trying to get leaner, and it just didn't work. And so that's ultimately why I went on to earn my PhD in sports nutrition and chronic disease, become a registered dietitian, because I wanted to become a true expert in the field to help all of those of you who have struggled with excess weight and not being able to drop the weight and just not feeling like you are in control of your health. I know how that feels. That was me. And when it comes to sugar alcohols, I participated in those significantly. You know, I thought that if I ate less calories, that I would ultimately drop the fat and weigh less. But it just didn't work for me that way. And I know that it doesn't work for a lot of clients in my weight loss company, PhD Weight Loss, that way either. And so for me, just a little snapshot of what I ate when I was dancing, trying to get the weight down. Breakfast would be like an instant oatmeal. And I thought it was all about fat-free, you know, getting calories down. And so I would eat an instant oatmeal for breakfast, and I had a huge sugar sweet tooth. And so I would put like a fat-free Cool Whip on top of the instant oatmeal for breakfast. And then I would have lunch. And don't judge me here. I'm being totally open with you on what I ate, but it's so terrible. I would get a deli turkey, like the fat-free turkey meat. And then I would spray, I can't believe it's not butter, spray on the turkey and roll it up and eat that. And then I really needed something sweet. So I would get the instant pudding, you know, the pudding where you put it into a bowl and it hardens automatically. I mean, what does that? Concrete even takes a little bit longer to get thicker. I do not know what is in that instant fat-free, sugar-free Jell-O pudding. And then I would put some more of the fat-free Cool Whip on top of it. And then, I don't know, dinner would be a piece of fish and some soy milk. Maybe a snack would be a Luna bar and kind of a fat-free, low-fat type of string cheese-like thing. I mean, so much processed food, so much fake food, and so much artificial sweetener. I remember I was talking to my mother at the time, and I was like, you know what? I'm doing everything that I can to try to get my weight where it needs to be. I will be so shocked if I hit 50 years old and I don't have two heads. So here I am. I still have one head, but I did make some changes when I was going through my doctorate training and really learning about nutrition. I actually ended up swinging the total opposite direction. It was like, oh my gosh, I need to cut out all of these artificial sweeteners. They're all just terrible. I need to eat real sugar. But eating that much real sugar also isn't good. We know that long-term high sugar intake leads to serious chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease, and helps with the development of certain cancers. And there's then heartburn and fatty liver and all these things that come to fruition when we eat a lot of sugar. And so I swung in the opposite direction, and that wasn't good for my health either. I still had pre-diabetes. I had high cholesterol. My weight still wasn't where I wanted to be. I had heartburn. And so today, I'm glad to say, throughout creating the PhD approach for my clients, I created it really for myself and for my husband, and I have much more sophistication and better balance in the way that I look at things. And that is my ultimate goal for you after this episode, is that you really learn how artificial sweeteners, zero-calorie sweeteners work for you and where you might want to use them and where you might want to let them go. For myself today, for example, if I'm going to eat ice cream, I know that I'm just going to eat real ice cream. Ice cream, by the way, is one of my kind of gateway foods, trigger foods, where I can't really eat it in moderation because I just like it so much. And I'm wired. I swear it comes from my father, who just has Haagen-Dazs. His freezer's filled with Haagen-Dazs ice cream. And I just really love ice cream. So if I have it in the house, I know I'm probably going to overeat it. So that's step one for me, is I don't have it in the house. But I also know that if I get a sugar-free, low-fat ice cream, I'll probably eat twice as much because it's just not filling. So an example of one of my favorites is a Haagen-Dazs ice cream bar. I do not eat these very often. Maybe like twice a year I'll have something like this, but maybe a Haagen-Dazs ice cream bar that has the delicious chocolate on the outside versus one of, I can't think of a brand right now, but one of those kind of keto ice cream bars. I'll probably eat 2 of the keto ice cream bars to try to satisfy myself when I could just eat 1 of the Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Overall, probably less calories with the Haagen-Dazs things and more satisfaction. So I just know myself enough with ice cream. That's how I navigate through it. But there are other things in my diet that I eat more on a day-to-day basis where it will include some sugar substitutes. So for example, if I eat a protein bar, I like Quest. That's a good brand to me. I like the taste of it, and it has a sugar substitute in it, and I'll have that. If I really want something that's sweet, like a gummy, I generally don't eat many of those, but I like the brand Smart Sweets. They are sweetened with regular table sugar, and they have some kind of stevia in it and more fiber, so it drops the sugar load there, and I'll have that once in a while. I just won't drink liquid sugar. I don't drink juice. I don't drink regular soda. I won't eat regular gummy bears and jelly beans and stuff like that, just because I know the load of sugar and the negative impact that it creates on my body. So with those items, I do go toward more of a substitute, but I don't eat it that often. If I really want something sweet to drink, I might have a Zevia, which is a soda sweetened with stevia instead of regular syrup. But again, I don't do that very often. So that's my goal for you. I want you to understand how these sugar alcohols and sugar substitutes, sugar alternatives work in your body. And then I also want you to understand your specific goals. Is it weight loss? Is it your gut microbiome? Is it blood sugar regulation? Is it all 3 of these? And then I want you to be able to put in play what works for you when it comes to utilizing these sugars or not. So we're going to take a deep dive today into the science. We're going to avoid the media hype and sensationalism so you can truly understand what the research is showing. In general, though, we do know that sugar is bad. We don't want to have high sugar intake over long periods of time because that is when we develop these types of diseases I mentioned earlier. Again, like type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, liver disease like fatty liver, Alzheimer's, dementia, and specific forms of cancer come from high intake of sugar over long periods of time. And, gaining good nutrition information is difficult because there is so much behind our recommendations. Big food and big pharma promotes sugar intake because they make money off of the products that have a lot of sugar in it, and they also make money off of us being sick as a result of consuming the sugar. You might even hear physicians or dietitians promoting sugar and just drink regular Coke. And usually if you look behind who they endorse or who they are sponsored by, it usually is the sugar companies. You also, on the other spectrum, might hear these individuals who seem very credible talking about sugar alcohols and substitutes and saying aspartame is perfectly fine and you should consume as much as you want of it. And we know that that's not the case either. So you really want to be able to dive in and scrutinize everything that you're hearing throughout the media and from those sources, even if you think that they are credible. And sugar is tricky because it is so appealing, and we are wired as a human species to go toward things that are sweet. It's a survival mechanism. Our brain wants the sweet stuff because we know that it's associated with calories. And when you're out there trying to survive in this world, you need calories to help you do that. We get addicted to sugar, and it's really tough to overcome. So then what should we do? Should we resort to these sugar substitutes? So first, let's talk about how sugar really works. We detect sweetness when sugar molecules bind and activate certain receptors on the tongue. This triggers neural signals leading to the perception that we've taken in something that tastes sweet. The tighter these sugar molecules bind to the receptor on the tongue, the sweeter the taste comes off to be. So another interesting thing is that we have these receptors on the gut as well. So you take in this sweet item, let's say you drink a Coke, it goes in, the sugar molecules bind to the receptor on the tongue at a certain level of tightness, and it tells the brain, oh my gosh, this person has just had something sweet, let's mount a response. It also, the Coke then travels through the body and the sugar gets into the gut, and the sugar then binds to specific receptors in the gut. And the gut, again, goes back up to the brain to tell the brain that, yes, indeed, we have had something that's sweet. Isn't that interesting? The level, like I said earlier, of strength that the sugar molecules binds to the receptor dictates the sweetness. And we always look at sweetness relative to table sugar, which is also called sucrose. And so I just want to list off some specific common sugars and sugar substitutes that we know of and how they relate to the sweetness of table sugar. So xylitol, maybe you've heard of xylitol before. It's a specific sweetener that's put into like toothpaste and gum and mints because supposedly it helps with cavity protection and prevention. It's just as sweet as sugar. So if you were to use xylitol, you would use the same amount of it compared to sugar. Aspartame, though, is 200 times sweeter than sugar. Interestingly enough, aspartame actually does have calories associated with it, but it's so sweet that you can use so little, you don't get as many calories. So it's more sweet bang for your calorie buck, if that makes sense. Then you have sucralose, which is also called Splenda, and it's 600 times sweeter than sugar. So you really don't have to use very much to sweeten something to the same level that you would with table sugar. Then you've got erythritol. You've probably heard of that. That's 0.7 times as sweet as sugar, so you have to use a little bit more to have the same level of sweetness. And then stevia, which you've heard about, likely is about 100 to 300 times sweeter than table sugar. And then allulose, which is a newer type of sugar substitute. It's my favorite. I'll talk about why, but it's 0.7 times. So if you're sticking allulose in your coffee, you would have to use a little bit more allulose than you normally use of table sugar to get to the same relative level of sweetness. So in general, when we think about sugar substitutes, our ultimate goal with using them is that we can reduce body weight and we can have better glycemic control with less calorie intake while satisfying that sweet tooth. But unfortunately, it's not so simple. It's really controversial because the research is poorly designed, the studies are usually too short, and compliance is really low. They use a lot of animal studies, and while yes, we are similar to mice, we're not exactly the same, and so there are some confusions there in the outcome of results. And most of these sugars are compared using meta-analyses, which lump all of the different types of sugar together, but all of these different types of sugar substitutes are very different. So lumping them all together as if they're the same causes a lot of controversy and confusion as well. Hey, really quickly, if you're interested in hydrating yourself optimally and want to do it in an efficient and effective way, I created an Electrolyte Plus mix just for that. It's called Dr. Ashley's Electrolyte Plus Creative, I know. And it's crafted with essential electrolytes, vitamins, and minerals for maximum absorption. With patented forms of zinc and vitamin C, it supports immune and adrenal function. Plus, chromium picolinate regulates healthy blood sugar levels while helping to curb those cravings. Say goodbye to headaches and fatigue. Visit drashleywellness.com and use code Ashley10 for 10% off your first purchase or 20% off your first subscription order with free shipping. Plus, enjoy 30-day money-back guarantee. Now back to the episode. So in knowing that the research is pretty poorly designed, let's dive in and talk about how they impact weight control, if they help with blood sugar control, and how they ultimately impact the body. So do they help us control our weight? Do they help you lose weight? So there was a meta-analysis published in 2014, and it was looking at 15 randomized control trials. So it took 15 different studies and put them all together and analyzed the outcomes. And in general, the outcome showed that those on sweeteners dropped 1.8 pounds more than those not on sweeteners. Another meta-analysis coming out in 2020 looked at 20 different randomized controlled trials, and they found on average that those people using the sweeteners had a lower weight by 5.6 pounds compared to those who used regular sugar in a group of obese individuals. So one more time, they looked at 20 randomized controlled trials of obese individuals, and those who were on the sweeteners weighed on average 5.6 pounds less than those who used regular sugar. So you would think, yes, maybe it has a benefit. But then we get to the animal studies, and the animal studies showed that those who had a more sweetener had a higher BMI, they overate, they gained weight, and the study ultimately suggested that sweeteners reduced their energy expenditure, so they made the mice not move as much and not expend as much energy as those on regular sugar, or they summarized that it could increase the absorption of ingested calories. So let me explain what this means. Let's say that maybe you eat 1/4 of a cup of almonds. You take in those almonds and you're actually not going to absorb all of those calories. Let's say it's 150 calories. You're actually not going to absorb all of those calories just because of the fiber in those almonds, because of unique differences in metabolism. There might be someone who metabolizes and absorbs more calories than another person for one reason or another. Maybe the type of bacteria they have in the gut absorbs more calories over another. So you might have 5 different individuals and one absorbs 140 calories of those 150 that you've taken in through the almonds. Maybe another person absorbs 100 calories, another one absorbs 145 calories. So I'm just giving you an example of how that absorption rate can actually vary between individuals. And so this animal study proposed that potentially when you take in artificial sweeteners or these sugar substitutes, that you absorb more of those ingested calories. So if you took in those almonds, maybe you would absorb 150, all the calories from those almonds, instead of what you did in the past, maybe you absorbed only 120 calories. So I hope that that one makes sense for you, but these are the ideas of how they think sugar substitutes could impact weight control. So the second question to ask is if they help with blood sugar control, and there's even more conflicting results there. So when compared to consuming food and drink sweetened with sugar, the consumption of low-calorie substitute foods improved blood sugar control. So let me give you an example of this. If we take someone, again, who drinks a Coke, and we take them and we give them Diet Coke, their blood sugar is going to improve. Their blood sugar control is going to be more regulated. Now, when compared to consuming unsweetened food and drink versus those who consume low-calorie substitutes, there's actually poorer glycemic control. So let me explain what this would mean with an example. If you take an individual who's used to consuming plain water or maybe just a plain club soda, like let's see, Waterloo is a brand of club soda that you can get with different flavors, but it's not sweetened with anything. Another one is LaCroix, is an example that you probably have heard about, with just kind of flavoring, essence of flavoring, and no sugar added. If you take someone who consumes these types of beverages and then you give them Diet Coke instead, it results in a negative impact in their blood glucose. So it really doesn't help regulate their blood sugar in the same way as consuming unsweetened drinks. So what we can get from this is that there's this hierarchy. Plain drinks and plain food without any kind of sweetener is the best when it comes to blood sugar control. Diet drinks with sugar substitutes would be next. And then we are generally the worst off with these regular Coke, regular Sprite, fruit juiced sugar-sweetened type of beverages and sugar-sweetened food items. But there is a but here, as there is with most nutrition studies and nutrition research. In 2021, there was another meta-analysis, and what they found is that there is a 13% increased risk in type 2 diabetes for every additional serving of artificially sweetened beverage per day. So that's pretty significant. The problem with this meta-analysis is they didn't account for anything else that the participants were consuming throughout the day. So those who were drinking more artificially sweetened beverages could have been eating more sugar and crappy food throughout the day, which could have also accounted for the increased risk of type 2 diabetes. And then they also didn't compare for regular soda intake. So for example, they didn't compare what the risk of type 2 diabetes would be if these folks were drinking regular soda in comparison with the diet soda. So perhaps if individuals were consuming regular soda, the risk of type 2 diabetes could increase by 25% per additional serving of regularly sweetened beverages. So, and also all of these meta-analyses were very short. So what we can conclude from this is that these artificial sweeteners, these sugar substitutes could be good in the short term, but for the long term, they might not have as many positive benefits as the body starts to adapt. So then, how does the body start to adapt to these sugar substitutes? There are a few different possibilities on how the body can adapt. So number one is the microbiome. Remember that your microbiome are the different bacteria that reside and inhabit your gut. And the type of bacteria that you have in your gut is actually really important. There are specific bacteria that can lead to more inflammation and metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, like gout, like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, all of these things. And there are also different types of gut bacteria that lend itself to low levels of inflammation and good health. So ultimately, we understand that we can't metabolize these sugar substitutes. In general, they just pass through in our feces and in our urine, but they do impact the gut microbiome. And there was a mouse study looking at this, and it showed that the microbiome shift to favor species associated with metabolic and inflammatory diseases when we drink these sugar substitutes and eat a significant amount of these sugar substitutes. So we really can see that it shifts the gut bacteria, and it's these gut bacteria that promote metabolic issues. And then number two, we can see that the body adapts in the brain. So number one, when we look at the brain doesn't find that these foods are satisfying, just like I shared that story with me and the Haagen-Dazs bar versus the keto bars. The keto bars with their sugar substitutes just don't allow my brain to trigger in the same way that the Haagen-Dazs ice cream does that tells me, gosh, she's really eating the sweet thing. It just doesn't activate the brain reward centers in the same way. And interestingly enough, they don't impact the gut signaling at all. So they totally bypass this signaling that we get in the gut when generally we eat regular sugar. And so we tend to eat more to reach that same level of gratification. It also, this is interesting, impacts the brain in a way that I like to explain, that the brain basically cries wolf. So here's what I mean by this. When we eat sugar, the tongue binds to these receptors. It triggers the brain to allow us to recognize we've eaten this food. Even when we just taste something sweet on the tongue, we secrete certain enzymes in the mouth to help digestion. And it tells the body, oh my gosh, she's eaten this carbohydrate, she's eaten this sugar item. We need to mount a metabolic response, and my metabolism will start to shift up to start to burn those calories. That's what all of our bodies, we want it to do. We want it to mount this response so we can burn off these calories. Well, what happens when we take in these sugar substitutes is the brain says, oh my gosh, something sweet has been eaten, but then it registers that there's no calories associated with it. And the brain and the body says, wait a second, what's going on? I'm mounting this response, but there's nothing to mount a response to. There's nothing to do. And so then you eat another, let's say, sugar substitute with 0 calories, and it does the same thing. And it says, gosh, I don't need to mount this response anymore. But then let's say you go and you eat a piece of birthday cake, and it actually has a high sugar load, high carb load associated with it. You eat in that birthday cake, and the body's like, she's eaten that sweet thing, but we know from the past it doesn't have any calories associated with it. So let's not mount the response. And then you eat this calorie load, but the body doesn't mount the response. And then you're going to store more of these carbohydrate-like foods. It's not going to mount the correct response physiologically that we need to maintain healthy. So that's what I mean by the brain kind of cries wolf scenario. And so we just need to be aware of that. So that is an important thing to remember, while also taking into consideration that the research isn't that great and each substitute impacts the body in different ways. So let's go through some of the most common sugar substitutes so you can decide, yes, this is something that I'm going to incorporate or continue to include in my diet, or maybe not. Maybe I'm going to let this one go and try something different. Okay, so number one is aspartame. We know from the research pretty much that aspartame isn't a great one. It causes weight gain, specifically fat mass, and specifically fat in the liver. Even when compared to consuming regular sugar-sweetened items, aspartame leads to more fat gain specifically in the liver. So that's not good. There was a recent study that got a lot of media hype saying that there's high risk of toxicity with aspartame. This is actually pretty unlikely. The studies were done in animals, and the dosages that they gave these animals far exceeded human consumption. So really, if you're eating or drinking things in moderate amounts or normal amounts for most humans, and it includes aspartame, you don't have to worry about toxicity, but it doesn't do anything great for glucose, blood sugar regulation, or body weight regulation. So not really any positive impact when it comes to metabolic health. Sucralose is the next one, and it is secreted out in our feces and urine. The negative thing about the research here is that most of it is done in animal studies. It does show that there's a short-term effect, and the short-term positive effect is that it decreases appetite and decreases body weight. But over the long term, once the body adapts to it, there's not a ton of positive impact on weight or glucose regulation. So in general, you could think of using sucralose for more of a short-term impact if you're looking on breaking sugar addictions. If you're looking to drop weight and break old habits, it could be helpful, but then in the long term, probably not something that you want to consume a lot of. Then there's erythritol, and erythritol is absorbed in the GI tract. And research shows that it really has a neutral or modestly positive impact on metabolic health. There needs to be more research when it comes to erythritol. Fine to use a little bit of, but probably not the best option when it comes to all these different sugar substitutes. Then you have stevia. Stevia is derived from a plant found in South America, and it's actually metabolized by the bacteria in the colon and excreted in the urine. There is a neutral impact when it comes to metabolic health. A lot of animal studies, again, not much on humans, but the general impact is positive when it comes to glucose metabolism and body weight. So in general, stevia looks to be fine, looks to be okay, and probably supportive of you if you're looking to drop weight and to regulate glycemic control in the body. And then the last one I want to talk about today is allulose. Allulose is my favorite. It's found in trace quantities in plants, but it is made synthetically to get the amounts that we would need to use in our beverages, for example. The positive thing about allulose is that there are a lot of downstream signaling pathways. So remember, I talked about it signaling in our mouth and then transferring up and telling our brain that we had something sweet, and that most of them are missing that signal in the gut, which could also impact how the brain cries wolf, that whole different scenario that I mentioned earlier. Allulose, though, does bind to those gut receptors, and the gut then will recognize that you've had something sweet and then signal to the brain. So it takes out that potential there of our body not responding physiologically in the way that we want it to if we have sugar substitutes and then regular sugar-containing items. So it really fools the brain into thinking that we've had real sugar, which I think is pretty neat. Again, not a ton of research done on allulose because it is a newer item. So in summary, it's best to stick with stevia. Allulose, again, is my favorite. It's looking good right now because of the impact it has on the gut signaling pathways. And then xylitol, which you find more in kind of the gum and toothpaste, they all have more positive impact when it comes to metabolic health, blood glucose control, and body weight. And then sucralose, it seems, has more of a benefit on the short term. In context of specific goals. So if you're weaning off of sugar addiction, breaking old patterns, looking to drop weight, you're in a weight loss phase, then for the short term, it seems like it's beneficial. And then long term, transitioning more onto potentially the stevia, allulose, xylitol options. It also is important to consider what you're eating in conjunction with these sugar substitutes. So a lot of these studies aren't looking at individuals who consume the sweeteners that I've talked about in conjunction with a healthy type of diet, right? It's either like these mouse studies eating feed and then having these dosages of sugar substitutes, or it's humans living a regular life and assessing the diet versus the regular, but potentially in these humans' regular life, they're not eating a good diet filled with healthy foods. We're actually in the middle of a study looking at the gut microbiome of clients who are participating in the PhD weight loss program. And for our clients, they have foods. Some of the foods contain some sugar substitutes, but they're also eating it in conjunction with a really healthy diet, more of a modified, sophisticated Mediterranean way of eating. And we've found so far that it makes huge, significant impacts on the gut microbiome. I have an amazing client, and he came in with this idea. He wanted to study the gut microbiome. He has a PhD in nutrition. He's a registered dietitian. He's like, you know what? I think that this diet is going to make significant impacts on the gut microbiome because, again, we know that there are certain gut bacteria that lend toward inflammatory diseases and obesity and weight gain, and that there are other gut bacteria that actually lend to reducing inflammation and optimal health. And so he studies the gut, and when he got started with PhD, he had 90 pounds to drop, and he was in his own research laboratory, and so he actually swabbed his stool at the beginning of his PhD program, 6 weeks into his PhD program, and at specific time space intervals throughout his entire program. And he found that his gut microbiome completely shifted. And he studies the gut all the time. He was in his, mid 60s, and he had his young research assistants and other researchers in his labs, 20 to 40 years old, test their gut microbiome. And he's like, I rivaled their gut bacteria. My gut bacteria was better than the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds. And he could not believe how much it shifted. So he said that he wanted to study this in other PhD clients. So right now we're doing that. And so far, we have about half of the number of participants that we need, and we're seeing huge shifts just within 6 weeks of creating some positive transformation in people's lives and in the way that they eat. I share the story with you so that you understand if you're consuming some of these sugar substitutes, but you're doing this in conjunction with a really great low inflammatory diet, that's all a part of the balance. And that can be optimal diet for your unique body. It's not that you have to go cold turkey and pull all of these out, but they do have a time and they do have a place. And I hope that this episode, this information allows you to be an advocate for yourself. You understand the pros and cons and where you want to put them into your diet or where you don't. So I hope that you got massive value from this episode. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please leave a review and follow us. It makes a big difference if you do that. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment below. Let me know what sugar substitutes you like to implement into your diet, what your favorites are, what ones you've let go of. And please let me know if you have any questions on any sugar substitutes that I didn't mention in this show. And remember, you've got to step up to make the change. Lead with your heart, train your mind, and do not negotiate with your body. See you next time.